Hi, I'm Claire Atherton and this is episode 33 of Beating B2D. In it, Olivia Wood, or Liv, shares her experience of dealing with undiagnosed autism and ADHD as well as BDD, a feeling she describes as being on one side of a thick pane of glass looking in on everybody else. Now a mental health counsellor, Liv describes how finally understanding why she is the way she is has helped her to build her self-esteem and show her self-compassion. As ever, aspects of Liv's story may be upsetting to some listeners. If you can stay with us, you'll hear an inspiring story of someone who has, as Liv puts it, reclaimed her life from her BDD. Just before we get started, this podcast is funded as a result of the Big Give campaign. Thank you to our champion sponsor Jack, or Just Ask a Question, and our community sponsors Ori UK, the Nightingale Hospital and Blonde's Fine Art. You'll find more information on our sponsors in the show notes. Now over to Liv. Hi Liv, thank you so much for joining us on Beating B2D. It's lovely to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Claire.
You're very welcome, and I'm sorry you've not been very well recently, and I hope that we're having to do an interview recording on a Friday afternoon is not going to tip you over the edge.
No, it's lovely to be here.
Great. So you're a really interesting person, I think, to talk to about BDD, as will become apparent, I think, as we get into the conversation. But when we spoke before, you said that you had a feeling of not being right from a really young age. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so a feeling of just not being right, or more so being different, was a feeling that was really, really prevalent for me as a child, and something that I still feel now to some degree. Socially, I felt like I was having to manually observe social interactions so that I could work out how to be a human effectively. And physically, I also felt that I had differences as well, or deficits, when it came to comparing myself to my peers. There was also some of the differences. I struggled with trichotillomania, which began at the age of 7, the hair pulling disorder. So that was a very physical difference, or a very physical sort of manifestation of what I was going through. And I didn't know what that was at the time. So that was a very tangible difference when I would think about myself in comparison to other people. And altogether, this experience was really, really distressing. And I tried my best to hide it and figure it out. But there was always that feeling there that something isn't right with me.
Yeah, that sounds really challenging. And as it turns out, you discovered later you were actually dealing with a triple whammy. So you had undiagnosed autism and ADHD as well as BDD. So I guess it's no surprise that you were finding life so challenging back then. I mean, other than the things you've just described, how else did those sort of conditions play out in your life? How did they sort of manifest?
Yeah. So socially, things were very, very exhausting. I spent so much time trying to figure out how to do things the right way, or what people meant by things that they were saying, or what their facial expressions were telling me. And it really was quite isolating as well. Although I had peers and I had friends, I still felt like I was kind of on one side of a thick pane of glass looking in on everybody else, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So there was definitely a feeling of isolation.
What do you think then about the fact that these three conditions sort of happened all at once, or existed all at once in your experience? Is there a link that you know of then between autism, ADHD, and a tendency to be an obsessive thinker, or to suffer from those obsessive thoughts that you find in BDD?
Yes, absolutely. Studies more recently have shown that there is a huge link between autism, ADHD, or neurodivergence in general, with obsessive thinking, obsessive compulsive disorder specifically, black and white thinking, things like that. We know that there's a huge link. So really, it's no surprise to me at all that I've been dealing with these three things together.
Wow.
And when I look back on my childhood, it all makes so much more sense now, how these things might have intertwined with each other and interacted with each other.
Absolutely. I mean, is it something that's just beginning to emerge in sort of research, or how well established is that link?
From what I've seen, it's quite well known that autism and ADHD can be linked with OCD.
Oh, right. Okay.
And that there tends to be a higher prevalence of OCD amongst neurodivergent people. However, when it comes specifically to BDD, I think that's still very much something that the research system is sort of catching up on, or just beginning to sort of dig into.
I mean, it does sound like it was an awful lot for you to deal with or work through as a young person. How would you say that your life feels like now? What does it feel like to be you now compared with when you were grappling with all of these undiagnosed conditions?
For me, awareness has been an amazing thing. To go from somebody who was undiagnosed to somebody who is now diagnosed and has more understanding of why I am the way that I am has made a really big positive difference in my life. Beforehand, my self-esteem was almost what I would describe as below ground. There was nothing there that I could appreciate about myself or bring myself to like, in a way. So to go from not being able to understand why I felt different and why I am different to then having some clear answers, I've been able to show myself that compassion, which I feel has been a huge step so far in my recovery and a very important one. So yeah, from going to somebody who is struggling with all these things, not knowing at all what's going on and why I am the way that I am, and putting it down to me being a failure or me not being right or being abnormal, I've gone from that to then being able to understand, okay, this is why this is tricky for me, or this is why my brain or my body tends to work like this. What can I do to care for myself? What can I do to accommodate it? So there's been a big shift with my self-esteem, which although I'm still working on that part of me after so many years of it being virtually non-existent, I'm now more equipped mentally and emotionally to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's such a big shift, isn't it? From, as you say, on the very, very, very low of non-existent self-esteem through to sort of feeling that you're kind of worthy of a good life. You know, it's a huge thing. And speaking of which, how do you spend your time now?
Yeah, so I am a mental health counsellor and I work with people who, like myself, are neurodivergent, so specifically people who are autistic or have ADHD. I spend some time volunteering for the BDD Foundation, which is such a joy, and I'm so grateful to be part of the community.
Yeah.
In my spare time, I really love singing and playing guitar. I also enjoy busking in our local town and kind of surrounding towns, and I love drawing. I love animals. I've got wonderful pet rats who I'm probably a little bit too obsessed with, to be honest. And I enjoy gaming as well. I'm a bit of a gamer, perhaps not very good at them, but I enjoy them nonetheless.
That's brilliant. I mean, the busking thing is very interesting because I imagine, I mean, do to correct me if I'm wrong, but I certainly would have, as a young person, really struggled to do that, I think, because of BDD. Do you think your BDD kind of goes away because you're enjoying what you're doing so much, or has it just never really been an issue in that context?
It's a really interesting thing to think about, and it's a question that I get asked a lot, understandably. On one hand, busking, I find it really, really helpful for my autism and ADHD because I know exactly what I'm doing and I'm not really interacting with people in the usual setting of small talk. I don't feel like I need to be masking because there's nothing there to try and interpret or translate.
Mm-hmm.
I know exactly what I'm doing. It's scripted and it's something that I enjoy.
Yeah.
But it would be a lie to say that the BDD doesn't affect me. When I'm busking, some days it's extremely difficult and I feel like I shouldn't even be stood amongst people at all. Family, friends, never mind in front of lots of people in the middle of a town centre. So there are some days where it really does impact me in that way. But I try to refocus my attention on the singing and the guitar and the fact that there are some wonderful people out there who really appreciate my busking. So it takes a lot of courage and a lot of effort to kind of try and shift that focus. And some days are harder than others. But because it's something that I genuinely enjoy, it's a manageable enough exposure for me so that it's still enjoyable.
And actually, you're still doing it. And that's the main thing, isn't it? So you could just say, oh, I just can't face it today. But you are. I mean, the courage is in the actual getting up and doing it in the first place. Never mind trying to move your attention, but actually just getting up and saying, well, I want to do this because I enjoy it and I'm not going to let BDD stop me from doing it. That's also a really big thing.
Definitely. And my family is incredibly supportive when it comes to me as a person and busking and BDD and all of these different factors. I couldn't do it without their help. And I've also learned that avoidance is not helpful. Although temporarily it may help me to avoid or navigate very, very painful and distressing emotions, in the long term, it is what's keeping the cycle going. So I try to remind myself that even though it might be difficult in the moment, for me to carry on and do the thing that I want to do despite BDD, I am reclaiming my life from BDD.
Exactly. And that's fantastic. Are you okay if we now go back to sort of the beginnings of your BDD story? So when it started and what you think might have triggered it?
Yeah. So my BDD, I believe, began around the preteen years, 9, 10, 11. That's when I really remember things starting to become very, very difficult. There was one specific scenario amongst many that I remember very vividly. We were stood under a tree as a family and we were having our picture taken by the pond. And I looked at the photo afterwards and it was that feeling of, oh my goodness, is that me? It felt like my heart had shattered into a million pieces because I thought that what I was looking at was a hideous monster, somebody who shouldn't be amongst other people because of the way that they look. But it's something which I don't think came about just from that photo. It was a very diverse set of factors, something which gradually grew and grew. I think the distress that I felt socially really was a huge trigger. And the fact that I felt so different and I couldn't quite put my finger on why that was, it's as if my brain turned to something a bit more tangible that it could use or control. And in my case, that was my physical appearance.
I mean, that makes so much sense. And in a way, our brains are trying to help us in a weird way, aren't they? Trying to find
Absolutely.
answers. Yeah. So did you then sort of feel like, well, if I can fix my appearance, everything will get better?
Absolutely. That became my full focus and purpose. This idea that if I could fix my appearance or if I looked a certain way, then everything in my life would be fixed. My emotions would be fixed. I'd be happy. I'd function socially. And of course, at that point, I didn't realise there was more underneath the surface to just my physical appearance. But that led to me spending a lot of time each day obsessing over my appearance and the reason why I looked the way that I looked. That was a big question that plagued me each day. Was why do I look like this? Why am I the one who's this hideous? Why isn't anybody else hideous? So there was a lot of very distressing questions, which I felt like had a simple answer, which was it's because I look this way. And if I fix this, then everything will be fine. But of course, that wasn't the case.
What was the main object of your focus, if you don't mind me asking?
Largely, it was my body shape, my weight, face shape, symmetry, things like that. I was in a constant state of hypervigilance around this. It made even just getting dressed in the morning extremely difficult. Shopping for my school uniform was an absolute nightmare. Anything to do with just being perceived, basically.
What kind of behaviours did you find yourself sort of, what were the compulsions? What did you feel kind of compelled to do, I guess, as a result of your BDD?
The main strategy or safety behaviour that I used was avoidance. Mirrors, reflections, anything like that, I would completely avoid. I would sort of try and feel my body for changes in my appearance or my body shape, my weight. I did a lot of comparing between myself and my peers, and I would sort of imagine surgical procedures in my head and think, well, if I did this, then that might fix that. Or my attention was so focused on myself, it was as if I was sort of imagining what I looked like from everybody else's perspective. It then swung from avoidance to checking, and I would obsessively check my appearance in the mirror. I would even find myself walking past the microwave in the kitchen and checking my appearance in the microwave, to the point where it became so automatic that I'm still now to this day trying to notice when that happens and break the cycle. But it would swing between avoidance and checking.
Right. And how badly affected were you by this? To what extent did it disrupt your sort of normal life?
It caused that much distress that I was reaching a point where I just felt like I couldn't be here anymore. And it felt as if it really took my life away from me. My childhood years and my teen years, it felt like, were completely stolen by the BDD. I didn't ever feel like I could do the things that my friends were doing, or that emotionally I couldn't cope the same way that they could. So it reinforced those feelings of being different, which then, of course, prolonged the painful emotions.
Yeah. And what happened with things like school? Were you able to continue in school, or?
School became harder and harder and harder. Primary school I coped okay with, but then the second I got to secondary school, everything became too much. The hair pulling at that point, I still hadn't sort of expressed that to my parents, even though they knew that was going on. They didn't want to push me into doing something that I wasn't comfortable with, or they didn't want to push me into facing it if I wasn't ready at that stage. But that's when the hair pulling became extremely bad, which was distressing, especially because I didn't understand why I was doing it. I thought I was a bit of a freak because of it. And also the fact that it's such a physical thing, it means my appearance is constantly changing, which did not help at all with the BDD. The autism and the ADHD made every aspect of school a challenge, from remembering to do my homework, concentrating in class, understanding social dynamics, just the exhaustion that comes from having to sit in a chair for 6 hours a day, study. And then the BDD on top of that really, really impacted me, especially because at that stage I was going through puberty, and that's a big stage of adjustment and change for any teenager, especially in secondary school, when people start talking about dating or these sort of bigger goals in life. I think especially as well, that shift from going from primary school to secondary school, there was a lot of social media, there was a lot of phone usage in the school, Snapchat filters, things like that. That's when all those things started to really become popular and a normal part of daily life. So there was a lot of aspects that I was not only dealing with personally because of the trick and the autism and the ADHD, but also the natural changes of life and evolution of technology at that time, which severely triggered my BDD as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really potent combination, that, isn't it? And I do really feel for all sorts of people who've grown up with smartphones, really. You know, it's already difficult enough being a teenager and going through puberty without that extra level of sort of scrutiny that affords you,
Yes.
self-scrutiny. Did you then ever actually get officially diagnosed for the BDD?
I didn't, no. It's something which I had come across a couple of times, and I was offered CBT eventually for the BDD, but I wasn't offered the opportunity to get a diagnosis. So I'm still undiagnosed.
Yeah. How old were you when you were offered the CBT?
Well, it's a little bit of a long story.
We've got time.
Because good, we're going to need it. To be honest, I went to counselling at age 18. I had been in the CAMS service before that, but unfortunately it wasn't the support that I needed at that time. So I had to wait until 18 to be referred to NHS talking therapies. When that time came, I went to counselling with the goal of understanding the trichotillomania. That felt like a physical manifestation that I could explore. I was a little bit more solid in my understanding of the trick. And at that point, I was still undiagnosed autism and ADHD and didn't know about the BDD either. So I went with the intention, really, of looking at the trichotillomania and why that might be happening. To cut the long story short, the counsellor spotted some traits of autism and ADHD in my presentation. And that was what led to me discovering that I'm neurodivergent.
Yeah, that must have been a really big realisation that that's what was going on. That must have been a shock. Or did it feel as if it was actually an explanation rather than a shock?
I think both. It felt very, very different from what media portrayed autism and ADHD as. And I very much had a stereotypical view of what a developmental disability might look like. I almost felt a little bit like an imposter, that if I didn't have these stereotypical traits of autism or ADHD, that it couldn't be me and that I was faking it. And there must still be something really, really wrong with me. But on the other hand, everything just made so much sense. And it felt like such a relief to understand that actually this isn't my fault that I'm struggling. There's a real reason behind this. And so now I have the opportunity to learn about that and accommodate it.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how did that realisation and change your life? What happened afterwards, after you realised what you were dealing with?
So that led to more counselling to understand how that impacted me at that time and to be able to process such a big diagnosis, really. It took a couple of years to go through the diagnosis process and get my autism and ADHD diagnoses. And I spent 2 or 3 years really, really concentrating on that aspect of me and understanding how I can honour that the fact that I've got a differently wired brain. And I also took the opportunity as well to understand how that might be linked with the hair pulling and sort of look back on my life and really discover who I am beneath the mask. But that didn't fix the BDD. That was still very much bubbling under the surface. And, well, I say bubbling under the surface, it felt like it was completely consuming me, but it was something which I hadn't tackled, and it felt separate to the autism and the ADHD.
How then did you get to the point where you were able to tackle the BDD head on as a thing in itself?
Well, I returned to counselling, and by that point I was 21 and I'd done some research properly into BDD because it's something that I had heard about in the past, but it's not something which I had really looked into as thoroughly as I needed to in order to be able to understand what was going on, and felt that that resonated with my experience perfectly. So I referred myself back to NHS talking therapies and explained specifically that I'd like CBT for body dysmorphic disorder. And I was very fortunate that they agreed, and I was able to have a course of CBT with a lovely therapist who also took into account the autism and the ADHD.
Great. What was that therapy like then? What were the things that you really remember from it that you took away as being useful for you?
For me, it was really the logic behind what was going on. I spent a lot of time understanding how my core beliefs are linked to my negative automatic thoughts and then how that would affect my behaviour. I also had the opportunity to look back into my childhood and understand how the BDD might have manifested and why that might have been. And my therapist helped me to challenge the BDD in manageable steps. And we would sit and do little exercises together, which really helped with my perspective. And it helped me to see BDD as not me. That BDD wasn't my whole identity, but it's a separate condition, one which I can learn to manage. So there was a particular exercise which really helped me to begin shifting my perspective. It was a very simple exercise where I sat down with my therapist and he said, I want you to pick 5 celebrities that you really admire or that you like, and I'll do the same. So we both sat down and wrote a list of 5 celebrities that we really admire. We went through the list, and mine consisted of actors or singers or comedians, and his was similar. And for each one of these celebrities, he asked me what I liked about them or why they were on my list. And of course, it was things like, well, I think they're really funny, or I really value their work, or I think their voice is amazing, or their writing skills are fantastic. And at the end, he said, so none of these people you admire because of their physical appearance, but because of who they are and what they do. And that almost hit me like a bus, because I thought, oh my goodness, that's right. I never ever thought of their physical appearance. It just did not occur to me as even being a thing, never mind admiring them because of that. It was all because of their personality or their skills or their determination and morals and values. That's why I admire them, not because of their appearance. So it really alerted me to a bit of sort of a contrast between the way that I see myself and I see other people. Because when I look at other people, I don't particularly care too much, really, about what they look like. I love my friends, I love my family, I love people that I meet because of who they are, not because of their appearance. And yet I was merging myself with the idea that my worth is my appearance, and that's all I am. It doesn't matter about my interests or my skills or my values. All that people see is my appearance. And so having the opportunity to write that down and turn that perspective on itself was really eye-opening for me.
Yeah, that sounds like a bit of a eureka moment.
Definitely.
That's fantastic. How did you then end up getting involved with the BDD Foundation?
Yeah, so I actually saw an Instagram post put on by the BDD Foundation mentioning that they were looking for volunteers with lived experience of BDD to help facilitate their program Overcoming Body Dysmorphic Disorder. And I thought, yeah, I want to give it a go. This is something which I really wished I had growing up. And I wanted to help other people who might have been in my position to understand that actually it is possible for them to reclaim their life from BDD. And in a way, it felt like it would be very healing for me, as well as hopefully having the opportunity to support others.
Has that been the case then? Do you feel like it's been healing? And if so, in what way?
It has definitely been healing, Claire. Just being amongst people who you know understand and who aren't going to judge you and have very likely felt the same emotions that you felt or engaged with similar safety behaviours. I really honestly cannot find the words to describe what that's like.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's that community idea, isn't it? I suppose that idea that you're understood, you're among people who really get it and you don't have to explain yourself really, I suppose, do you?
Yes, absolutely. It's that understanding that really none of us are alone in facing BDD.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say you know now that you wish you'd known when your BDD was really at its worst, I guess, alongside your neurodivergence as well, when you were struggling with everything at once?
I wish that I would have known that BDD isn't me, that it's a real psychiatric condition. It's not a personal failing, but it's something which can be understood and something which can be managed, that there is a possibility to enjoy life and to do the things that I want to do despite the presence of BDD.
How would you say that you managed to keep doing that? Because you did say at the beginning there were some days with the busking when it's still really, really difficult. And you mentioned that you sort of do things actively, like trying to shift your attention and things like that. What else are you doing regularly to just keep on top of it? And because I love this idea that you've been able to reclaim your life from it. How do you manage to keep it your life and not go back to where you were?
Yes. Well, it's not easy. To be honest, volunteering has been a massive, massive help because it's helped to shift my focus from thinking about my own struggle with BDD to supporting others. But it also acts as a little bit of an alert system, is how I would describe it, which makes me aware of perhaps some safety behaviours creeping back in, which does happen from time to time. I've reached the point where I think I would consider myself to be in lifelong recovery, certainly not fully recovered or cured, but something which is going to be lifelong management. So being able to hear other people's experiences and go over the programme myself as a volunteer helps me to maintain awareness of how my BDD is at any given point. And it takes active effort to act on what I notice. So if there's something that comes up, like kind of a trigger or a safety behaviour, which I've perhaps unconsciously been doing, it takes a lot of effort to spot that and go, okay, this is something I need to face, because if I leave it, it's not going to be helpful. So it takes a lot of effort and a lot of determination to, as anybody with BDD will understand, it takes so much mental courage and emotional courage to face BDD.
There's a bravery and a resilience in all of these stories. I think that's really quite inspiring, because it's so difficult, as you say, yet people just keep trying because they know that it's worth it, to keep going at it.
Definitely.
What would you finally say to listeners who are really struggling with the BDD, particularly those who are also neurodiverse?
I would first say that you're not alone, that you're not broken, but that there is help and support out there, and that it is completely possible to see the light at the end of the tunnel and reach that light, no matter how dark or frightening or impossible it feels at the moment. It is possible to reclaim your life from that feeling of hopelessness and despair, and that there are people out there who really genuinely understand and care for you.
Exactly. That's lovely. Thank you so much, Liv. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I do think it's going to bring something different and really useful for people who might recognise things in your story from their own experience other than the BDD. I think this neurodiverse angle is not something we've really explored before, and I think it's going to be so helpful for people. So thank you so much for taking the time to share your story, and I know these things aren't easy, and we really, really appreciate it. Thank you, Liv.
Thanks, Claire.
Thanks. Bye. Thank you so much again to Liv for coming on the podcast. Her story will hopefully bring hope to anyone dealing with neurodiversity as well as BDD, or to anyone who simply feels that they're somehow not right. For more episodes, search for Beating BDD on major podcast apps and on Spotify. You can also leave us feedback by following the BDD Foundation on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube and Facebook. I'll be back with another interview soon. Until then, as ever, remember that this podcast isn't therapy, so please do seek help from a trained professional. Thanks very much for listening.